Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Jinnah Institute series of webinars. Over the month of August, we noticed that the news timeline was filling up with incidents of forced conversions across Pakistan. There were as many as 3 incidents reported in Sindh and Punjab. And although this has been a long-standing issue where young girls, minors, young women are almost always converted before a marriage under mysterious circumstances or with curtailed choice to Muslim men, this issue hasn't quite ever been resolved. The month of August was, in any case, a bad time for the women of Pakistan. It was a bad time of grisly events that were reported and brought to light the full scale of human rights violations, abuses that were happening, as well as where the social attitudes towards human rights in general. Minority rights, of course, take a back seat, and it is to the benefit of minority rights activists and human rights defenders who remind us year on year that the minorities have a full stake in the citizenship of Pakistan. They remind us that the constitution enshrines certain rights, which we have over time curtailed or cut back. I am happy to discuss the issue of forced conversions with Mr. Peter Jacob, who is the director of the Center of Social Justice, and Mr. Kapil Dev, who is a human rights activist. I welcome them to our webinar today and will undertake with them a discussion on the state of play in human rights in Pakistan. Jacob Saab, if I could start with you. What is the issue of forced conversions in Pakistan and why is it coming to light?
Yes, thank you so much, Jinnah Institute and Salman Zaidi sir. Indeed, besides from the reportage that we get off and on in the national and international media about the occurrence of forced conversions incidents happening from all over the country, the recent census data also shows that there is a decline in the number of religious minorities. The overall number has declined by 0.5%, which means more than 500,000 people over past 19 years. So that is another evidence that shows that something is happening, at least that the number of religious minorities or the religious diversity in Pakistan is on the decline. There are a number of issues, and we would like to start with the socio-cultural aspect of it. I would like to say that in the backdrop of those incidents seems to be the phenomena or the historical phenomena of bonded labor and sexual servitude that seems to be in play behind these, because like 70% of over 70% of the forced conversions are female below the age of 18, supposedly. I mean, 46% confirmed, but in rest of the cases, the age is not mentioned. So the analysts assume that where there is age not mentioned is likely to be mostly the underage girls. So it seems like, and you never hear about them after the marriage and the conversion. The family is disconnected. So these things point out to, some malpractices, abuses of human rights of minority female children.
Peter Saab, if I could just add another question on top of that, I think it's important. We hear about these cases every year, and the conditions are outrageous. Why doesn't it, galvanize enough decision makers into action? Why doesn't it create an outrage beyond social media?
Well, in this particular case, I would like to call it very exemplary case. The case was discussed before the Functional Committee on Human Rights in the Senate. And that is what triggered a huge change. The administration in Pakistan and Punjab in particular, the province where this case was situated, became active, and finally then the girl was recovered, even though the court had earlier rejected the application made by the father. Now, I would like to tell you an interesting thing. You see, in this case, what we found out that a Muslim neighbor called Jamal Haider, he was very instrumental. He was encouraging his Christian neighbor to basically approach every institution to go for a protest, and he used to accompany. And this is the kind of empathy that looks like viable way forward for the society to basically stop these abuses. So Jamal Haider, as he helped the Christian neighbor to be, and belonging to the same class, he has similar less or more influence of the victim. So he is helping out. So we were inclined, we were rather inspired by the story, and the Center for Social Justice produced a documentary film, which is also named Hamsaya, the neighbor. So among the cultural, I would say, sources that would be necessary to galvanize is going to be the social conscience of the people. My belief is that many people among the majority community are not in the knowledge, or they are misled to believe that people belonging to minorities, especially girls, they are very inspired and they would like to embrace Islam. If they come to know, and when they come to know that these are uh, petty abuses and petty crimes, and sometimes heinous crimes involving which basically leads to this situation, they will certainly try to stop the abuses. There will be a public opinion in favor of. So the government and the civil society basically should try to undertake the uncovering of these abuses, informing the people of the abuses.
What, in your experience, as an activist, has worked?
Thank you. I think when it comes to the activism, I think we activists do highlight these issues, and often we get to hear this, that please don't highlight these issues. These issues, if you highlight these issues, that actually bring a bad name to the country. It is not that we highlight these issues, that's why country is being defamed. It is because of these incidents when they happen, that's why the country is being defamed. So we need to understand this, first thing. Second thing, I think issues of minorities, they don't get they're not highlighted in the mainstream media, so we don't get that airtime on the mainstream media, Urdu channels, or even the space in the English print media. So as a result of which, we activists prefer to highlight these issues on social media. So social media is just like an alternate media for us, where we don't have to pay a single penny to anyone, and it is the only platform, it is the only gateway for us where we highlight these issues. And now you can see that there are many young activists like me from Hindu community, from Christian community. You can see that they are engaged in the social media. They are using the platform of Twitter and Facebook and other social media, and they are highlighting these issues. As a result of which, these issues are being sometimes the notices are being taken. Sometimes many big names in the journalism, they also take these issues. So you can see that there is already a growing trend. There is already growing trend of this trend of growing intolerance in the country in the reaction of what is happening in India. So I think this is a reactionary, extremism which we are facing at the moment. And so I think this is a really horrific to see that most of these people who are engaged in this type of vandalism are those who are the mobsters. They are the youth. They are the misguided and misled missiles, actually, I can say. I think they are unemployed youth, most of them. So I think this is a horrific trend to see that this level of intolerance, this level of fanaticism, the way it is growing in them, and the way it is spewing hatred and venom of the hatred against Hindus and Christians and other minorities. This is a really, it's a really high time for the government to think, and government need to come up with a counter narrative, because we don't see any counter narrative from the government side that can actually cater it.
So, Kapil sir, we've asked for a counter narrative from the government many times. We've been expecting one on the issue of radicalization, on terror. That narrative may or may not come from the state. And sometimes it's problematic if the state starts constructing a narrative. Shall we not expect a narrative to emerge from society itself about how it views itself,
The way the hatred has been injected in the books, in the curriculum books about the Hindus, okay, and then you might have read in the books, the way that hatred has been taught to the young minds, young raw minds, I think that really matters. Government has to come up with such an inclusive narrative where all faiths, sects are respected, all treated equally, and that should be guaranteed in the constitution, and all those discriminated clauses, sections in the constitution, they should be removed.
Thank you for that, Kapil sir. Peter Jacob sir, I want to come back to something that you raised in when you were speaking. You said that there are some opportunities. There does come about, a culture of change if you push and advocate for the right things. And we find empathy from citizens who are able to create change on the ground. I find that to be something that should be highlighted, and perhaps there's many more of such cases that we can take heart from. In your experience as an activist and a human rights defender, what opportunities do you think we can identify right now?
Well, first of all, I would like to acknowledge what Kapil has said, that the state, in order to adopt an identity, a religious identity, it has in the meantime also imposed identities on the citizens of Pakistan. So everybody must have a religious identity as first identity and the only identity, which is problematic. A departure from a problematic narrative will have to have that, broad accommodation for minorities. It cannot be simply imposed by, by will of a few people. It has to be, it has to have a greater ownership. Secondly, about your questions, looking at opportunities, well, I would like to recall 2017, when a legal remedy was sought, an amendment was introduced to Pakistan Penal Code, which is section 498B was added, which mentioned the forced marriage of non-Muslim women. So at the face of it, because it prescribed heavy penalties like 5 years of minimum imprisonment and 5 lakhs of fine, it sounded like a heavy punishment, and the narrative could have helped the gap which was existing, because there was never ever a complete ownership of the problem by the governments. If we had seen that ownership, acknowledgement of the problem, we would halfway cover the problem, because then that narrative will inform the people at large that the problem exists. So they will come out of that denial which the governments had themselves created. So that created an opportunity in 2017, I must say, to impose heavier penalties against forced conversions. But since the parliament did not debate it as such, the law was passed silently. The result is that this section was never put to practice. No case of forced conversion has been ever tried under this law, although we've had this law for more than 4 years. Then, of course, there is a Justice Department and the machinery engaging in administration of justice are not sufficiently sensitized yet. I mean, they treat those cases on regular basis, routine basis, as elopement or some other bona fide conversions. We can go about awareness, and the societal behavior can be helpful in stopping those abuses, because it is our belief that common people, they are never against these systemic injustices and violations of human rights. Once they come to know, would certainly stand by the victims. Then, of course, legal remedies, and of course, the political narrative that Kapil has talked about is going to be very important, that we are going to see a change, because ultimately it's not one forced conversion or several forced conversions, hundreds of them. It is basically the respect for freedom of religion, which should be central and which is only one of those freedoms that Constitution of Pakistan and the international law affords to all citizens.
Kapil Saab, if the language of activism is changed, if the language of protest is altered, and if a mass sensitization instead is conducted with government departments, with ministries, with decision makers, who are often distracted by other issues. Their day jobs is not to focus on minority issues, or they're looking after affairs of the state. If I know that sensitizations have been conducted with police, if all of this is done, what results do you think this will deliver?
There is two approaches, from bottom to top or top to bottom. I think both approaches should be done parallelly at the moment. The things which I identified in my earlier reply, that things which need to be fixed at the top level. And of course, you need to sensitize those who are sitting at the helm of the affairs at the top level. In general, they're not sensitized about the minorities protection, one thing. Second thing, they're not sensitized about those laws which are already prevailing. As mentioned by Peter Saab, one of the clauses that 498 be like that, and some other clause, and Sindh Hindu Marriage Act, there is Child Marriage Restraint Act, which is in a sin. So I think some of the forced marriages can be stopped under that act, Sindh Child Marriage Restraint Act, whereby the age is defined 18 for any adult couple for the marriage. But what we see that there is a lack of implementation of the law, there is lack of awareness of this law. What about those sitting at the district level who are just like a district level officer, maybe assistant director or deputy director? So they don't even get the notification of that law for the 6 months or for, let's say, for a year. I think state needs to come up with a solution which is more, effective, more productive, more inclusive. So if it is not like that, I don't see any changes gonna come soon.
Peter Jacob sir, is the state necessarily committed to minority rights? Is the state even interested to mainstream or include minorities?
I've been talking about this concept of official minorities and non-official minorities, favored minorities and unfavored minorities, unfavorable attitudes. Judiciary can help equalize some of the rights, whereas political narrative, political action will also make it possible to correct the mistakes. Of course, those constitutional amendment is a far cry. It's a very hard feat, and it will take time. But still, we can do many things to actually, at least first of all, address the human rights abuses, which is that you should have a functional National Commission for Minorities, autonomous and independent commission, legally formed. That means having a legislation first, and then giving autonomy. Now, it is also related to making the existing national human rights institutions functional and autonomous. Although a lot of time has been wasted by the committee which was formed 21 months ago, involving both houses, National Assembly and the Senate, and 26 members from across the communities and across the parties were made part of it. It has made little progress, I must say, on the fact-finding of forced conversions, collecting data, or finding views of the stakeholders. They have reportedly prepared a bill to stop forced conversions, which is in the custody of the Federal Ministry for Human Rights. And I think it would be a wrong idea to assume that a bill prepared by a few people or committees can solve the problem. The significance of a legislation, a protective legislation, lies in wide acceptance of the problem and wide acceptance by the society. So therefore, I would like to recommend that the committee and Ministry for Human Rights should make this bill public and try to get approval as soon as possible. Now, we know that the only reservations that were forwarded by the religious parties is about the age for conversion. I mean, this can be tackled by technical safeguards. This can be tackled by exposing the cases which involved forced conversions and heinous crimes. It can be tackled by mobilizing public opinion. And there comes, if any problem concerning the interpretation of religious freedom, we should go about that as well. On tokenism, I must say, not only minorities, but rights in general. They have been taken as, symbolic gestures that we should use to repair the image of Pakistan. That has been a very popular thinking, that we should try those avenues and copy various countries in making laws and institutions to basically improve image and to build our future as a democratic country. So I think when it comes to an understanding that these are serious fundamental changes, reforms that we need to inculcate in our institutions, in our national fabric and life, the situation of minorities will improve drastically together with other marginalized sections of the society.
Thank you for that overview. Peter has listed recommendations for the way society as well as the work of state and government can improve. In your mind, are there specific recommendations that prevent forced conversions? If there's any legal remedies or justice-related issues that you can highlight, we'd like to hear them.
A bill is needed on this issue. So when the law will come into force, only then this issue will be resolved. And for that law, there is a need of political will of these political parties. People's Party once showed this courage. People's Party once showed this, this dare to come up with the idea, and they did pass a bill in the Sindh Assembly. At the 168-member House, they unanimously passed the bill. But what happened when that bill went to the governor for the assent? At that time, I think that party was pressurized by these religious right-wing parties, okay, and then that bill was withdrawn. So as a result of which, what we see that till the day today, there's no bill has been brought to the assembly. So I think these legislative measures are quite necessary to bring these changes. And as I mentioned earlier, that there is also need to come up with those things which can really help in changing the narrative and making it more inclusive narrative. And third thing, I think the type of hatred which is injected in the books, in the curriculum, that really need to be sifted out, that really need to be taken out. And for a final thing, I think Pakistani Hindus should not be viewed from the Indian lens. This is the last thing I think which I can make. And same goes for my Christian brothers and sisters. They should not be viewed from the Western lenses.
I think it's really the call of governments and the state to decide year on year if they would like to see a democratic Pakistan, if they would like to create accommodation for minorities. I don't think minorities should have to prove their patriotism or say that they are Pakistani any more than servicemen, people who serve in the military, people who serve in government or anywhere else. I think citizens must be included and given their full share of citizenship and justice that is enshrined in the Constitution of Pakistan. The issues that we have discussed today, they've been under discussion for many, many years, decades now. And it is to the credit of human rights defenders like Mr. Peter Jacob and Mr. Kapil Dev that they keep these issues alive for us. I thank Mr. Peter Jacob and Mr. Kapil Dev for highlighting these issues as they need to be. I thank both you gentlemen and hope you can join us another time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.